Example, you're watching Tungtul BBS and I'm your host Tashitema. Today we'll be talking about positive psychology and I have Mr. Loyd Hanneman from the National Board of Certified Councilors and he's been working in Bhutan for the past few months. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I would like to first of all start by asking, what do you mean by positive psychology?
Well, positive psychology is actually perfect for Bhutan because Bhutan has their gross national happiness. So happiness is actually a very important value to Bhutan. Positive psychology helps us to achieve that goal of happiness. So psychology is actually the study of the mind, right? And then if we can think positively, we affect how we perceive life. And if we perceive life from a happy perspective or a positive perspective, it increases our ability to improve our mood to happiness, hopefully.
Talking about positive psychology, I think we need to know about the placebo effect. So can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, people who don't know what placebo effect is, it has to do with, again, perception and expectations and beliefs. So placebo is put into practice when we have like a new drug, for example. And before we can put the drug on the market, we have to do some experiments with it to make sure that's going to be effective. These experiments generally are trying to prove to be better than the placebo. So the placebo is, if you have two groups, you have the experimental group and you have a control group. And the control group is going to be given a pill that looks like the drug, but there's no medicinal properties in it. It's like a sugar pill. So they call that the placebo. So you give this to the patients or the two groups, but the people in the groups don't know if they're in the experimental group with the real drug or if they're in the control group with the fake drug. For example, let's just say that it was a drug for their arthritis in their knees, okay? And so they come back after, let's say, 6 months of trying out this drug, and they will report, oh man, this drug is really fantastic. I can now ride my bicycle. I went hiking with my wife yesterday. My knees are great. So then they'll look at the bottle of pills that this individual had and compare it to the list of either the placebo or the experimental drug, and they'll notice that it was indeed a placebo. So they'll tell the individual, I'm glad that your knees are better, but you had a placebo, you had a fake pill. There was no medicinal properties in it. This individual will argue and say, but you must be mistaken because I can actually move my knees better without pain. And they'll start demonstrating how they can move. And the researcher will still say, no, look, this is the number on your pill bottle, this is the number on our list, and you had a placebo. Then the individual will say, but I also had the side effects. You said that I would have, diarrhea and that I would have stomach cramps and headaches, and I had all three of them. And then the researcher will explain that's called the nocebo effect, which means that if you expect something bad to happen to you, to your health, you can affect it in reality. So the placebo effect, it was actually the mind, right? So one wanted it so badly, and they expected it to happen, and they hoped that they actually triggered a chemical reaction in their body from their thinking, which was positive thinking, right? So hence placebo effect can be related to positive psychology.
So would you say that when we have mental illness like depression or stress, it does create some physical illness?
Yeah, so there's a science called epigenetics, also called the biology of belief. And it teaches that our thoughts trigger an emotion, and the emotion consequently triggers a chemical release from our brain into our body. So for example, some research indicates that 75 to 90% of all outpatient doctor visits are stress-related. That's a large percentage of medical issues, physiological problems caused by stress. So what causes stress, right? So often we have a thought that is causing us to be anxious. Like we're worried about problems with our family or with our job or whatever, some type of serious finances. So that thought is causing us to have stress and to have anxiety. That emotion of anxiety, stress, is going to release into our body the chemical cortisol and adrenaline. And if it's a continuing cycle of thought that triggers anxiety and stress and then cortisol and adrenaline into the body over and over and over, the body is the subconscious mind. The body is going to become addicted to those chemicals, And because the body is the subconscious mind, it's going to trigger thoughts to the conscious mind to get more of that emotion, anxiety, and more of that stress chemical, such as cortisol. So then you become this cyclical cycle, and you become clinically anxious, and you start to develop physiological problems, because cortisol is only supposed to be released into your body for a short period of time during a fight or flight, right? But if you're always under stress, you're always having anxiety, and you're always having this cortisol released into you, it's going to start deteriorating aspects of your health. So this is a direct link from thought to emotion to the chemicals to the body. So it's how your thoughts can affect your physical health. Mm. Furthermore, if you have good thoughts, so if you have happy thoughts, you do things that make you feel happy, you think thoughts that make you feel happy repeatedly, of course, then you're getting the happy emotions, the positive emotions, and then the positive chemicals, such as serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin and endorphins. So the same thing that's true for thought as it is for behavior. So every behavior you do also tends to trigger an emotion and then the chemical released right into the body. If you do that behavior over and over, then it becomes like a habit or becomes an addiction to that chemical. For example, you see people who claim that they're addicted to running, right? Or they're addicted to bicycling because they get such a high out of it. So if they do this bicycling repeatedly or this exercise repeatedly, they get addicted to feeling good. So then the motivation is automatically, because the body's addicted to those good chemicals, the body's going to automatically motivate to do more of that exercise or more of that behavior, whatever it was. So anything can become addictive if it's repeated long enough, because your body's always going to be releasing chemicals that can be addictive.
Okay, so can we say that if mental illness can cause health problems, a positive mind can cure those health problems?
Yeah, but it's not so easy. I mean, it's easier said than done, right? But I always explain how discipline is very important, discipline of thought. But before you can apply the discipline, you have to be aware of your thoughts. So a lot of times when people come in depressed or anxious, and they'll say, nothing is causing it, just comes out of the blue. Well, this could be because they're not aware of the thought, so they have to go deeper into being aware of their thinking. And a lot of it is subconscious. So for example, when you're having a nightmare, you're completely unconscious, right? But you're having this nightmare. Then you wake up from the nightmare, and what is your body doing? So the body's having a physiological reaction to something that you were just thinking, it was all in your head. So your body is like you have heart palpitations, you have shortness of breath, right? You're sweating, you're trembling, all the signs of anxiety or fear, right? But it's all a physiological reaction caused by what's going on with your mind, because you're completely safe in your bed and you're safe home. So that's an example of how our thoughts can trigger an emotion and trigger this chemical release. Again, to change that, because in your waking hours you may have an anxiety attack, or in your wakening hours you may feel depressed and you may not know exactly why. So subconsciously you could have these thoughts but not be aware of them, these triggers and not be aware of them. But you can always control your conscious mind. So if you are feeling depressed, for example, you can do something and you can think something to change that mood. So, for example, people who tend to be depressed, they tend to isolate, they don't socialize anymore, they tend to stay home and watch a lot of TV, they don't exercise anymore, they don't go out into nature anymore, their diet is usually poor, right, and they're sleeping poorly. So all those things can be symptoms of depression, but they can also be activities that lead to depression. So if somebody is in this depressed state with all those symptoms, they have to use some type of discipline to get themselves off the couch or out of bed and start walking, for example. There is a doctor by the name of Norman Doidge, and there's a little line in one of his books that I really love that says, if there's a placebo in medicine, it's walking. So often just by getting the body out moving, it's automatically going to help you physically, because in a way exercise helps you physically, right? But it also helps you mentally, because you're getting the endorphins moving again, the adrenaline moving, the endorphins flowing again. Then you get dopamine going, which is the feel-good, the pleasure neurotransmitter. So this happens naturally from exercise. Another important tool that we can use when somebody is depressed or anxious is meditation. So here we are in the land of Bhutan, the kingdom of Bhutan, which is a Buddhist country, and meditation is a big part of Buddhism. So we've now found from research to explain why meditation is so important. So meditation releases, when you have a regular practice of meditation, it releases those feel-good chemicals, the dopamine, the serotonin, the endorphins, and the oxytocin, which makes you, oxytocin is calming, but it's also like a trust chemical, and it's a bonding chemical, so it makes you feel good in your relationships. So these chemicals are naturally released just by meditating, by calming the effects of worrying about the past and the future, and relieving your senses, because you're usually closing your eyes, so all your 5 senses are no longer sending information to the brain to process. So you put the brain in a state of homeostasis, of balance and of rest. And the body, as we know, is able to heal itself if we put it in a state of homeostasis. So the brain, like any other part of your body, can heal itself, has the potential to heal itself. You cut a finger, right? You just have to clean it and put a Band-Aid on it, stop using it, and then in a few days, you take the Band-Aid off and it's healed. You break a leg, the doctor's going to set it, put it in a cast, you stop healing, you stop using it. After a while, you take off the cast, take the x-ray, and the bone is healed, right? So the brain is the same way. It can be overworked. It can start to malfunction because of its overwhelming input of all the data, especially, like I'm saying, from ruminating about things in the past, worried about things in the future, whatever's going on in your present life, plus all the 5 senses are constantly sending in data. So in meditation, oh man, you're just completely calm, and they found that not only are you releasing those chemicals, those good chemicals, so you're changing the physiology, the chemical of your body, the chemicals of your body, the biophysiology of your body, you're also changing the brain. So they found that the front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, actually becomes larger. And the amygdala, which is triggered every time you become anxious, so when the amygdala is like the bridge between your emotions, your negative emotions like anxiety and fear, and the body. So when the amygdala is being activated, it's sending messages to the body to have those anxiety symptoms that we talked about earlier. So when you meditate, the amygdala becomes less activated and actually starts to shrink. And then you're actually changing the shape of the brain, right? The formation of the brain concerning the amygdala, so that next time that you are under stress, you don't have the same physiological reactions to it because the connection has been weakened. And you have less of a reaction to stress because the amygdala isn't as activated as it had been. The hippocampus, also a part of the limbic system, enlarges during meditation, and that's for your memory and for your learning and for your feeling good. So when that's enlarged and the amygdala is smaller because of meditation, you naturally change the brain structure, so you're less apt to become anxious and fearful and depressed for meditation.
So you did mention some points to stay positive, to inculcate the positivity in ourselves, which is meditation, exercise, and discipline. Mm-hmm. Are there others too?
Yeah, nature's been found, even through scientific research, to improve mood. Along with the discipline of thought, I'll get back to perception. The story of a visitor who goes into a university art class and sees all the students up against this big window looking out at it, and they're painting something on their canvases. And the visitor asks the instructor, so what are they painting? And he says, why don't you go to the window and see for yourself? So he goes to the window, and there's just one big field and one tree in the middle of the field. That's it, that they're looking at. Then he looks at every student's canvas, and they've all painted something completely different. Some made the canvas filled with the tree. Some made it mainly the field and the trees in the corner, or some people emphasize the sky. So we can choose what perception we have. Sometimes when we're in a bad situation, we tend to look at our difficult situation or a new situation, we tend to look at the negatives first. And if we look at the negatives, then that's going to paint our perception of the rest of our full experience and our emotional reaction to that experience. But regardless of what situation you're in, you can always find something positive, if not some things positive, as you focus on those and it's not like you're blind to the negativity, but why focus on the negativity when you can focus on the positive and make yourself feel better? So perception is a big part. In Buddhism too, they say that everything is the mind, right? So we create our reality with our mind. For example, this interview right now, and you could be looking at me and thinking, God, this guy is so boring. He's just talking on and on and on about stuff, and I have no interest in it. Or you could open your mind and say, wow, that stuff is really pretty interesting, and hopefully I can apply it. So there you go with perception. We have control over it, so we might as well control our perception to look at the positives in whatever aspect we're in. It's kind of like the old saying, that the glass is half empty or half full. You look at it at half empty, it's a pessimistic view. But if you say, no, it's half full. So it's a difference in how you feel. So regardless of what situation you're in, you always find things to be grateful for. Here's just one example. It's my own personal example. So when I was in the Air Force, I was transferred out of a job into another job for some hearing problems. And the other job that I went to was not as prestigious and as stimulating as the former job. So I was very unhappy with the job. I was unhappy with my boss. I was unhappy with my work hours. It was hot and humid. So there are a lot of reasons for me to feel negative. So one day, walking home from playing tennis, I was so depressed, and I called my brother from a payphone. Back then, it was in the 80s. And my brother answered the phone, and he said, Loyd, how's it going? And I told him all my complaints like I just told you. So he heard them all out. He was very patient. And by the time I finished all my complaints, he said, wow, Loyd, so you said that you just got finished playing tennis. He says, yeah. And he goes, so it's sunny over there, you can actually play tennis? Because over here it's raining in Los Angeles. And I says, yeah, I just got finished playing tennis. And he says, oh, so were you playing by yourself against the wall, or did you have a friend to play with? He says, no, I played with a friend, yeah. And he goes, oh, you only been there for 2 months and you found a friend who plays tennis? That's great. He goes, yeah, it's nice, it's nice. And he says, yeah, so you're going to go out to the chow hall to have lunch? He says, yeah. And he goes, oh, so isn't it nice you can just show up and they serve you the food and then they clean up afterwards, you don't have to cook or anything? I go, yeah, I like that. And he says, and then, so what's for lunch today? Lasagna. Well, isn't that one of your favorite meals? Oh yeah, I love lasagna. And he goes, then afterwards you're going to go home and to the barracks and take a nap. He says, yes, I am. And he goes, yeah, it's nice also that you don't have to worry about rent or paying the utilities. You already have a bed and shelter, and it's all taken care of. And they even gave you a uniform to wear, so you have clothes on your back. Oh, this is true, Junior. And then he said, Loyd, do you realize that there are people in the hospital who are in body casts and who have tubes up every hole of their body? They can't play tennis. They can't join the Air Force, So when he went on like this, it just changed my perspective. And I realized things that I could be grateful for, which he very nicely pointed out to me, that I completely took for granted. So in our day-to-day life today, we can see how, we can always look at negative, but why? Because it's going to just bring us down. And we live in the land of happiness here in Bhutan, so we might as well look at all the positives. When I first came to Bhutan, for example, there were some negatives that I saw. I was looking forward to coming to the Shangri-La that was perfect. So it was an unrealistic expectation, which is another thing about positive psychology, is that we should always be open-minded and open-hearted and not cling to our expectations. So my expectations were a little bit dashed when I first arrived here. But then I realized, I could look at these things that I'm finding negative and it'll ruin my 4 months here. Or I can look at the positives. And I'm so glad that I did, because I found so many positives about being in Bhutan that it's been a fantastic spiritual and emotional and character-building experience for me that I would have missed on had I focused on stupid petty things like the uneven sidewalks, and the trash that's around and so forth. But no, the Himalayan mountains, my God. Best thing about Bhutan, I'm not saying this just to blow smoke, but the best thing, and I've said this several times, is the people. So, and I think it's the people here have the potential to be genuinely happy because they have great values, they have a great spiritual base, which teaches them everything that science is now proving to be correct, right? The whole thing about the mind is everything and perceives everything, and is your reality, how you create your reality through your thinking. And meditation, for example, and family values, the very strong family units here. And then you live in beautiful nature, it's all over the place, and I find that the Bhutanese people enjoy hiking, which is a fantastic physical exercise, plus it puts you in nature. So there's so many components just to be in this country that lead to happiness.
Talking about the people of Bhutan, I guess you have been seeing many patients in the psychiatric ward, and you have had like few decades of work experience in the US, and you have been in Bhutan for a few months. So how have the people been responding to this therapy of positive psychology?
Thankfully, beautifully, yeah. And I do, okay, so psychology, the psych part of psychology means spirituality or spirit, right? So I think any effective treatment is going to be a balanced treatment that's going to be a mind, body, spirit, of a holistic approach. Because the Bhutanese people are, it's almost ingrained in them, their spirituality, and living in a Buddhist country. So it's wonderful for me in my practice to be able to include spirituality with the mind-body elements. And like in any other culture, we tend to forget the spiritual part of our health. So when I bring it into therapy, you can see them light up. It's like, oh yeah, I used to. Like some people say, I used to meditate, but I don't anymore. Or I used to say my prayers, but I don't anymore. And when they recapture this practice in their life, they automatically start to improve, and especially the practice of being aware of their thoughts and how they perceive life through their mind, right? And once they get back in touch with this, which they probably learned since childhood, I don't know, and for generations here, it's healing for them. I mean, that alone is empowering. And now we have the science, like I mentioned earlier, that backs it up. So when I share with them the science, such as neuroplasticity and epigenetics and quantum physics, that back up what the Buddhists teach for, who knows, since thousands of years, 2,500 years, it all makes sense to them. So they become empowered to do the self-healing.
Talking about the law of attraction, it states that what we attract into our lives is due to our focus on it. But sometimes people don't see that happening. Why do you think that is?
So quantum physics is the science behind the law of attraction. Briefly, it teaches that everything is energy. So this is energy, everything is energy. How is that so? If you break everything down to its smallest element, right, you start off with a cell, for example, and then cells are made out of molecules are made out of atoms are made out of subatomic particles, which are actually packets of energy. And these packets of energy fluctuate rapidly at the speed of light, from being a wave of energy to being matter. They're constantly moving around from being a wave of energy to being matter. So not only is everything energy, but we're all connected on a subatomic level to each other. So there's like a matrix of energy lines that connects everything to everything else, everybody to everything else, everybody to everybody. It's the reason why an explanation or an example of this is if you're here in Thimphu and your husband is all the way in Africa, for example, right? And you're just sitting here missing him so much, and you're loving him and you're missing him, and all of a sudden your phone rings, and it's your husband. And you said, oh, I was just thinking about you. And he says, yeah, I've been thinking about you so strongly, that's why I had to call. Well, that's not necessarily a coincidence. There's this connection between the two of you, this energetic connection, and that was vibrated by your thinking about him, right? There's some research about this, actually called Entangled Minds. That's done at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Petaluma, California. They do a lot of research about this. So this happens, it's not so uncommon, but this can be explained through quantum physics because of that energetic connection. Now, because we're all energy, and we live in this field of energy, which means like this matrix of energy lines throughout, Albert Einstein said that the field is the only reality, and why he said that is because anything you can possibly imagine already exists in this field of energy in which we live. So if everything exists that you can possibly imagine, how do you attract it to yourself? Getting back to the law of attraction. So there are two components for this. You not only have to visualize what you want, very clearly in your head what you want, but you have to also raise your emotional vibration to match that vision. So for example, I had a student, a client who was, she graduated from high school back in the States. She wanted to go to this prestigious college that was a private college, but it cost a lot of money and her parents only had so much money to help her go through it. So she applied for grants and she applied for scholarships. She got some, but she didn't have quite enough. So she was working 3 jobs during the summer before the new semester started at this new college for her. And she was still not getting enough. She was getting discouraged, she got depressed, she got anxious, so her father sent her to me for counseling. I taught her about quantum physics pretty much like I just taught you. I told her to apply this, to visualize herself getting the money, visualize herself paying her tuition, visualize herself being in class now and getting great marks, and then graduating, getting her diploma, right? And then have her feeling match that vision. So she can't like visualize that and then just think, yeah, that'll be really nice, if that happened. No, she has to get, like I'm right now, enthusiastic for her, right, like this. So she did that. 2 weeks later, she came back, and she said that from some unexpected source, I believe it was her father's distant brother or something who wasn't really close to him, gave him money because he wanted to see what his money can do now, and said wait till he died to give it away. So the father gave that money to her. That took care of some part of it. Then she realized that, there was a grant that I applied for that I never heard from. So she called up the school and asked about the grant. They said, no, we don't have any application for that grant. She called somebody else. Then she thought, I feel like I should just go down there in person. So she drove 2.5 hours to Seattle, went there. She was sent from office to office, all of them saying the exact same thing. We don't have any application for that grant. The deadline for the application is done. But she persisted because she felt so strongly about it. She finally found a woman who did look further into finding this grant paperwork, and she found it, and she got the grant. And that paid for the whole amount of her tuition. So she's now in school. But see, so one can say that's a coincidence. Well, anything can be considered a coincidence, right? But when stories like this happen repeatedly, one has to say what I feel is the obvious, that we have the ability to attract to ourselves what we want if we take care of those 2 components, the visualizing exactly what we want and then raising our emotional vibration to match it.
Prior to this interview, we were talking about an article that you mentioned where it says that our brains are like pharmacies. Mm-hmm. So can you explain about that?
Which the interesting thing I will say is that when people are depressed, we have medication for that, right? We have these antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. And, for example, to increase the serotonin that's in our body. So it's not absorbed by the body anymore, it's actually going to be staying activated. And also to increase dopamine. These are external medications. But we now know that we can release those ourselves. So, the brain is a pharmacy. In this article, the first experiment that they talk about is they took, I think it was 3 glasses of wine, and this was done at the Stanford University in California. And they had the students volunteer, and they said, we want you to taste these 3 glasses of wine and tell us if this one here, which is more expensive, or this one is a medium price, this was at a cheap price, if this one really does taste better than the rest. All the students said, yes, that wine tastes the best. Not only did they say that wine tasted the best, but the part of their brain that activates dopamine for pleasure was actually activated in their brain, which means that it released dopamine into their system. So they got the chemical dopamine. In reality, all 3 glasses of wine were the exact same. So they all had this chemical reaction to believing that one wine was more expensive than the others when it wasn't. Another experiment they did was they put a heating pad on the thigh of the participants, and they put them in an MRI so they could see that their pain center of their brain was activated. Then they said, okay, now we know that this causes pain. We're going to put a salve on it and then put the heating pad back on it and see what happens to your pain. So they put that, and they told them this salve is going to block the heat. It's going to block the pain. So they did, put the heating pad back on, put them in the MRI, and the pain center of the brain was deactivated. In reality, that salve was only Vaseline. It had no properties to stop the pain or to stop the heat. But because they believed it, it did. The third experiment they did in this article, the article talks about, is they took people that were managing pain on morphine. And without the patients knowing it, they cut the morphine dosage in half for a period of time. I forgot how long it was. And they asked these patients if they had any change in their level of pain. And there was no change in the level of pain relief, even though their medication had been halved. They expected it to be the same, so they had the same results, despite it being half.
So it all depends on how strong your belief is.
Right. And a lot of it is subconscious, It's like, but a lot of it, but sometimes the subconscious can be triggered by the conscious. Basically, you would sit with your back straight because you want good energy to flow, right, through your spine. And either my feet on the ground like this, or ideally I like to be on my couch at home with my legs cross-legged and my hands like this, just sitting relaxed with my back straight. Inhale very, very slowly through your nose, like at the count of 6. And then you're envisioning, ideally, this white light coming in through your nose, this white healing, purifying light through your nose. And as it goes in your nose, it's going throughout your entire being. Then you exhale more slowly, like at the count of 12, through your mouth, very, very slowly. And as you're exhaling, you're imagining this gray light taking all the toxins and negativity out of your system through your mouth. In quantum physics, they say where the mind goes, the energy flows. So if that is your vision, then that's what's happening, right? So you do this one deep inhale at the count of 6, exhale at the count of 12, rest a while and breathe normally, then do again a second time, rest a while, do normally, and a third time. So you're really feeling like you're clearing your body, making it healthy, right, and your mind. The next step would be to relax all your muscles. So while you're breathing normally, sitting with your spine straight, you start from the scalp of your head, and you relax the scalp. And you relax the forehead, then your eyes, then your jaw, then your neck, your shoulders, all the way down to your toes, right? Just slowly and gradually. This is all taking some time, but it's fantastic. It's great therapy. After your muscles are all relaxed, you just focus on your breath, breathing normally, going in and out, in and out. You can even say in, out, to keep your mind focused on it. I find it helpful that with every exhale, I say in. With the exhale, I remind myself, relax, to keep all my muscles relaxed. If you have thoughts that come to mind that are distracting, like something you forgot to do, or something that you have to remember to do in the future, or whatever thoughts that come to your mind, you're always kind and loving towards yourself. You don't judge the thoughts. You just are aware of them. Oh, I'm thinking this now. I'm going to come back to my breath. Interesting thing is that if you're aware of your thoughts, that teaches you that you are not your thoughts. You are the entity inside that is aware of the thoughts. So that alone can be very insightful to realize